Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 365. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about a place that's known for nuclear power, the stockyards, and even a World's Fair as we go to the south side of Chicago.
I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. And yes, there are 365 episodes of the Amateur Traveler, one for every day of the week. Actually, there's a few more extra episodes in there. This particular episode of the Amateur Traveler is sponsored by Viator. And Viator does, in fact, have 76 different tours of Chicago, including at least one of the south side of Chicago, which is this week's episode. They can also save you money on airport passes, architectural cruises, so check it out, amateurtraveler.com/tours. Before we get into this week's episode, I do have three news stories for you. The first one is good news. There is a leak coming out of the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States that before the end of the year, you may be allowed to use your iPad or Kindle device during takeoff and landing. For those of you who get tired of the airline magazine, that is indeed good news. And a little bad news for those of you who've been on It's a Small World in Disney World, you may have suspected that that song could drive you crazy. Well, apparently a disabled man got stuck on the ride when the ride broke. He was stuck for half an hour while that song played. It took him 3 hours to medically stabilize him, and he has just sued and won $8,000. And then in the strangest good news story, China Airlines has said it will pay for a woman from Georgia to fly to Taiwan to be reunited with her camera, which she lost on a 2007 vacation. The odd thing with this story is she didn't lose the camera in Taiwan. She lost it in Hawaii. It just washed up on the shores in Taiwan. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Amy Bugbee. Amy is the author of Suffering and Celebration of Life in America, about a road trip journey that we will hear more about at the end. But Amy has come to talk to us about the South Side of Chicago. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
And about the only thing I know about the South Side of Chicago is that I think Bad Bad Leroy Brown was from there, or is it The Man Named Jim? One of those songs, and that the White Sox play there.
The White Sox do play there. The South Side of Chicago, I guess it has kind of a dubious history where maybe the North Side is where a lot of the nightlife and the nice neighborhoods are, and Chicago's South Side, it has some rough neighborhoods, and it has a lot of ethnic neighborhoods. There's a lot of Irish and Italian that settled there, so they were probably considered second-class citizens at the time that they moved there. So all of the kind of working class people are more on the South Side. So it's overlooked a lot of times in tourist literature and stuff like that.
Excellent. So why should I go to the South Side, and what should I do or see while I'm there?
There is so much to do and see on the South Side of Chicago. I tried to compile a list, so I guess I'm kind of starting from the South Loop and working my way all the way to the Indiana border.
Okay.
So if you're in Chicago and you want to do something a little different, and most of these places, a lot of Chicagoans aren't even going to know about. But if you're visiting Chicago and you want to get off the beaten path, the South Side is the place to go. I guess the first place I would go if I was visiting Chicago would be the Cultural Center, which isn't necessarily South Side, but it's at the corner of Michigan and Randolph. And they have galleries and stuff in there, but they have a room of all the tourist literature, everything that is going on in the city of Chicago. So it's a really good first stop. It'll tell you every play that's playing, every exhibit that's at every museum. It's really a good spot to stop in.
Now, is this the one just across from Millennial Park?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
I have been there. All right.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I know, even being a Chicagoan, I can spend an hour in there looking around.
So we're literally just across the street from the Bean, or the Cloud Gate sculpture that Chicago is well known for these days.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. But before that was Millennium Park, it was part of Grant Park. And Grant Park is basically, well, it follows along the whole lakefront of downtown. And Daniel Burnham, who was one of the city planners, he believed that the lakefront was for the people. So Chicago is really unusual in that respect, that the entire lakefront, with the exception of a few factories way down on the south side, is all public land. So you can pretty much travel the entire city along the lake. And it's all public access. There's no houses on the lake, like in Milwaukee or other cities. So it's exciting in that respect. But if you're in downtown Chicago in the South Loop, there's some great places to eat and there's great public art. It's funny, I live in Oregon now, and when I think about the things I miss in Chicago, it's the public art, the museums, and the food. And so when I lament leaving there, those are the things that I miss.
And when you say public art, I think of a couple of things in the park that we just already talked about, but what else should I seek out and make sure that I see?
Well, on Washington, there's the Picasso, which everybody talks about and everybody knows about the Picasso. But across the street from the Picasso...
I don't know about the Picasso. Hang on here.
Oh.
I apparently am not everyone, so...
Okay, well, I think it was the late 60s, Mayor Daley commissioned Picasso to create this giant sculpture. And it's in a plaza right at Washington and State Street. And it's huge. It's maybe 3 stories tall. And it's before the Bean, it was probably the most well-known piece of Chicago public art. But people have mixed feelings about it. They say it's ugly, whatever. But across the street from it, there's a Miro sculpture that's really beautiful. It looks almost like South American tribal art or something, but it's about, 25 feet tall. And then if you go around the corner from there, another piece of my favorite public art is Marc Chagall has a mosaic that is huge, and you can walk all the way around it, and it's the 4 seasons, and it's absolutely beautiful. I guess I grew up in Chicago on the South Side, and so I'm from a working class background. So for me, a lot of the stuff I like to do was free. So I like to see anything that doesn't cost anything. So public art is something I really enjoy.
Excellent.
So if you go south from there, you get into, there's a great new sculpture I went to see in 2006 when we were visiting Chicago after we'd moved away. And it's by a Polish artist, and I could not say her name. I would totally butcher it. But it's right at Michigan Avenue and Roosevelt Road, and it's these, maybe 10 or 20 foot tall steel, headless, armless people that have these giant feet, and there's about 100 of them all walking around. But of course, it seems like they're like in chaotic poses, and it's probably one of the newest pieces of art in Chicago. So if you go south from there, you get into the neighborhoods like Chinatown and Pilsen and Little Italy. And Little Italy, people will tell you, is Taylor Street, and there is some pieces of the Italian neighborhood that used to be there still there, but they're mostly expensive restaurants or businesses like Al's Beef that have become a chain. Most of the people from Little Italy moved further southwest to Oakley, which is a side street near 24th and Western. And if you go over there for Italian food, you're really going to get real authentic Italian food. All the restaurants are small little storefront restaurants, and people really don't know that it's even there. So rather than waiting for an hour to be seated at a restaurant on Taylor Street, go down to Oakley and see where the neighborhood moved to. And they do an awesome Italian festival in June that I've been to a few times. That's really great.
Now, is that around some particular holiday? Why June?
I'm not sure. Probably because it's guaranteed to be pretty nice weather in Chicago.
Okay. I'm just used to a lot of Italian festivals happening around Columbus Day.
Oh, interesting. But it's a great little festival, and there's delis and little restaurants and taverns and bakeries and stuff over there. And then there's Chinatown, which is it's the original Chinatown. Chicago's actually such a big city. It has 2 Chinatowns now.
And before we get to Chinatown and leave Little Italy, you mentioned restaurants. Did you have a particular favorite or two?
No, I've been to a lot of them over there, and they're all good, and they're all different. I would just look at the menus and see what sounds good to you. They're all going to have their little family recipes and their regional recipes, and so they're all good.
Okay.
In Chinatown, there's a lot of good places to go. My favorite place in Chinatown proper is Wan Kao, which is in an older building, and you go up some stairs. But off to the side of Chinatown on Archer and Cermak is a little mall. They call it, the Chinatown Square or something of that nature. And if you go in there, that's really where the Chinese people of Chinatown spend time and money shopping and dining. There's a great noodle shop there that's become really popular, so maybe you want to do that on a weekday or early in the day. And there's a great hot pot there called Lao Zi something, but it's all in this little mall, and there's a Chinese barbecue place, and there's little herb shops and Chinese grocers, and it's really, really a great cultural experience. You'll go in places and they'll be selling deer tail extract and just the most bizarre things.
Okay, which I'm sure will cure all that ails you.
And that's what they say. And then if you go further south in Chicago, there's a really historic spot at 35th Street. It's like 35th and Cottage Grove, 636 East 35th Street. And that's the Stephen Douglas tomb. And Stephen Douglas he was a senator who ran against Abraham Lincoln and lost for president.
Well, Lincoln ran against Douglas for senator, and Lincoln lost.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Lincoln-Douglas debates put Lincoln on the national stage, but Lincoln did lose the election.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Well, his tomb is absolutely amazing. It's really worth going to see. It doesn't cost anything. And most people, because it's tucked away kind of at a dead end, nobody really knows it's there. You see it from the trains that go by, the trains that go to the south suburbs and stuff, but no one really knew what it was. So I went exploring one day and I found it, and it's really a great monument. But more than that is it was the location of Camp Douglas during the Civil War, and it was a POW camp of Confederate prisoners. And one winter, 18,000 prisoners died. I mean, it has such a history there. And I was talking to the caretaker one day when I was there, and I was saying how his flowers were just absolutely beautiful. And he told me this kind of bizarre story that he felt that the flowers glowed so much more because there were so many souls there. And so they made the flowers gleam. I don't know if that's true, but that was his take.
Well, there might be a lot of natural fertilizer there, but...
But it's a good spot to check out. And you can do it in a few minutes and then head over to Bridgeport, which is an old Irish community now it's Irish and Italian. There's a lot of Chinese people there, and there's a lot of artsy people there nowadays. There's a lot of art galleries and things of that nature. But there's a couple really good restaurants there. And one of the best pizza spots in Chicago is in Bridgeport. It's called Phil's Pizza, and it's on 35th Street. And it's amazing. It's probably the greatest pizza.
Now, was this Chicago-style pizza, or?
It's real Chicago-style pizza.
Real Chicago-style pizza, okay.
Thin crust.
Okay.
I know people all over the country, when you talk about Chicago pizza, they all think it's the
thick crust
stuffed
deep dish
pizza.
Yeah.
And that's something people might do once a year. I mean, once a year my husband and I would go over to Gino's East maybe and have a stuffed pizza, but real authentic Chicago pizza is thin crust. And Phil's Pizza, it's Morgan and 35th Street. It is the best pizza in the city, I think. And I actually recently met a pizza maker in Portland who agreed with us. So also in Bridgeport is the Bridgeport Bakery, which is on Archer, 2907 South Archer, and they make these bacon buns that are unbelievable. It's like a croissant with a piece of bacon in the center. Oh my gosh, I still dream of those things.
Health food then, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then if you go further down Archer, maybe 3600 block of Archer, you can come to Lindy's and Gertie's, which is one business, and they sell Lindy's chili and Gertie's ice cream. And so you go there, and I guess their philosophy was they could sell chili in the winter and ice cream in the summer, but you go there, and I've never made it out without having both. You have to have both.
Okay.
But it's a famous Chicago spot, and they make their own ice cream, and their chili is really great, and it's a historic little gem on the south side of Chicago. If you go further south in Chicago, you can go by where the Union Stockyards once stood, and that's famous from the Upton Sinclair novel, The Jungle. And they still have the original gate on Halstead and Root Street, which is really beautiful to see. And I'm told, I don't have a television, but I'm told that there's a TV show now that is based supposedly in that neighborhood called Shameless.
I don't know that, but I do know that my connection to the South Side is that when my great-grandfather moved over to the United States from Denmark, he worked not at the stockyards, but across the street at the tannery, and probably lived in the south side of Chicago, I would guess, and worked as a human elevator was his first job in the United States. He spoke no English at the time, and it was a very dirty job. It was a job that people didn't keep very long because you came home smelling very bad, but he had no sense of smell, so he kept the job longer than some. But my great-grandmother had a great sense of smell, so he had to wash off every night before he came in the house. But one day the engineer who fired up the boilers got drunk and didn't come in, and my grandfather had been, or great-grandfather had been, a engineer in the Danish Navy, so he fired up the boilers, and the person he worked for said, "You should be doing something else," and helped him find another job. So,
oh wow, that's neat.
So yeah, my family came to Chicago when they came to the United States.
Oh wow, yeah, those tanneries, they do smell awful. There's still tanneries all over Chicago. I know we used to live right by the Union Stockyards, my husband and I, and we would go ride our bikes around the neighborhood. And it was not unusual to see like a goat hoof or something lying in the street, some piece of an animal that fell off a truck or something. I don't know. It's very odd sometimes pedaling around those neighborhoods.
Well, I know the story is that, and I think it was Swift or Armour. It was one of the two of them, but I think it was Swift that used to go into the sewers and the rivers where the things would dump out from the slaughterhouses there, and he was to just find anything that kind of was left over and try and figure out some use for it, because they actually broke even on the meat and then made all their money on the hides and on the hooves and all of the things that they could make out of the byproducts of the beef.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, they used to just dump the carcasses right into the river over there in the Chicago River, so they call that part of the river Bubbly Creek because it would bubble so much from all the rotting meat being dumped into the water. But it's a really interesting neighborhood over there. I mean, there's lots of little shops and things, and now there's a lot of galleries and stuff. And also in that general vicinity is Pilsen, which was traditionally, at least in my lifetime, Mexican community, and now there's a lot of artists there, but they've really held on to the Mexican culture. So there's a lot of beautiful murals on buildings that are like of Aztecs and really traditional Mexican art that's really beautiful.
It's interesting because it sounds like the original name would be German or Czech, and so it's gone through probably a couple different ethnicities over the years.
Exactly. But over there, they have a Mexican Fine Arts Museum, which, they changed the name to the National Museum of Mexican Art, and that's on 19th Street. And they have some great exhibits in there. And I know when I lived there, it was donation only, but they may have an entry fee now. But they have an incredible Day of the Dead exhibit every fall, October and November. And you can go into their gift shop and buy little candy skulls, and you can see demonstrations on how they make those little candy skulls. It's really interesting. So if you go further south down Lakeshore Drive, which is the road that kind of follows the lake, around 57th Street or so, you'll come to the Museum of Science and Industry, which is a fine museum. But the history of that building and the other things in that area are really worth checking out. If you drive just past the museum on Lakeshore Drive and pull into the parking lot there is the original lagoon from the 1893 Columbian Exposition. And the museum itself is the only building still standing from that World's Fair in 1893. It was the only fireproof building because for the fair it was where they housed the fine art. And so a few years later, when that whole fairground burned down, that was the only building that remained. And it's beautiful architecturally. Well, okay, Louis Sullivan might disagree, but it's really beautiful. And there's the lagoon is the original lagoon that all the buildings of the World's Fair were on. And there was a giant gold statue of a woman there. And they have a replica of her elsewhere in that park. There's a huge park behind the museum. And if you park in that lot over there and you'll walk over an old bridge. And that bridge is also original to the 1893 World's Fair, and go around the bend. There's a beautiful Japanese garden, and that Japanese garden was built at the turn of the last century, but during World War II, people burned it down in protest. And so I think the last Mayor Daley got together with the city of Osaka, and they rebuilt the whole thing, and it's absolutely beautiful, and it's free to go to. You could easily spend an hour walking around the Japanese garden. And that little bridge that you walk over that I said is from the World's Fair, that's where Clarence Darrow, the famous attorney, that's where his ashes were sprinkled when he died. And there's lots of stories of people seeing him walking around the park and seeing him in the museum. I don't know if that's true, but it's just an interesting piece of history. But if you go further down and drive through the park on Hayes, I think is the street, you'll come across this giant statue. It's like 25 feet tall of this golden woman holding a torch. And she's the replica of the one from the World's Fair. And she's absolutely beautiful. The city of Chicago found it in a warehouse somewhere. It had just been tucked away for 100 years. And they pulled it out and refurbished her, and they put her up there. And she's absolutely gorgeous. Really worth the drive.
Well, and that World's Fair is actually what drew my great-grandfather. He was supposed to come.
Really?
He was supposed to have a job in the World's Fair in the Danish booth, but it didn't turn out after he got here. But the World's Fair was in part to celebrate the rising of Chicago from the ashes of the Great Chicago Fire.
That's right. There's so much history connected to that World's Fair. There's a very famous Chicago architect, Louis Sullivan, who basically created the Chicago School of Architecture. He trained Frank Lloyd Wright and stuff. But he was so angry about the architecture because they chose neoclassical rather than modern that he actually stood outside the fair and told people not to go in, which ruined his career, and he ended up dying penniless in a hotel. But his work, most of his buildings have been torn down, but the few that remain in Chicago are absolutely incredible. If you're in Chicago, I would Google him up and go see what's left of his buildings because they're amazing. That park is Jackson Park, I think it is. And Jackson Park links into Washington Park, which goes further into the Hyde Park neighborhood. And if you go see the Golden Woman, the statue of the Republic, you'll go see her. And then you go further down 59th Street, you'll come to this fountain. Well, you'll come to the University of Chicago campus. But just past the campus, there is the most incredible fountain. It's my personal favorite piece of public art, probably in the whole city. It's called the Fountain of Time. And it's by Laredo Taft, who was like the official sculptor of Chicago from like 1880 to 1920 or something. But this thing is amazing. And it's had to be restored because he was experimenting with concrete, which probably wasn't the best idea. But it's this huge fountain, and there's Father Time in this cloak, and he's facing this I don't know, maybe 130-foot long wall of people. And it's all these people through time, and you see the Romans and the Western migration, and it's just the most incredible sculpture. It's absolutely amazing. And they just redid it. They restored it, maybe 10 years ago. And I got to see it while it was being restored and go inside it. But it is remarkable. I mean, it's something I think everyone should see. You can Google it and look at pictures of it, but they really don't do it justice. It is unbelievable. And then on the University of Chicago campus, about a block north of the Fountain of Time, is a Henry Moore sculpture called Nuclear Energy. And that sits on the spot where the first nuclear test was done when they were trying to build the bomb.
And when we say the nuclear test, we don't mean they set a bomb off there, but that's where the first self-sustaining nuclear reactor was.
Oh, no, they blew something up. They blew up. It's funny, when I was researching for this podcast, I was surprised at all the revisionist history that I found in different things I was looking up. But yeah, the University of Chicago made a decision that they wanted to be known for academics over athletics. So they let them blow up the athletic field, I guess, to kind of make that statement known with a bang. And so they literally blew up the athletic field, and there's still spots on the campus that are hot, that are quartered off. I had a friend who was a research librarian there, and she said there were parts of the library building that they couldn't go in, that they had taken all the books out of and stuff, and they were just empty because the radiation levels were too high for people to work there.
Not sure about that story, just because they were trying to keep the whole thing really secret at the time. So
I don't know.
But that's the way they tell the story in Chicago, you're saying?
That's right.
Okay. Excellent. Where do we go next?
The next place that is an absolute must is the Oriental Institute, which is also on that same campus. And it's on 58th Street. And it's a little bit tricky to find because of the campus has all these garden areas that aren't car friendly. So it can take some doing to get the 2 blocks over from there to the Oriental Institute. But it is an amazing museum. They have Mesopotamian artifacts, ancient Egyptian artifacts, Assyrian artifacts. They have these incredible statues in there. They're just unbelievable to see this ancient history and just the culture that existed so long ago. I mean, this stuff is from BC, whatever, 700 BC and earlier even. And a lot of the artifacts were obtained by a professor there who was one of the inspirations for Indiana Jones. Yes. So these are a lot of his collection that he acquired during his escapades.
Now, I should ask, since you were talking about hard to get the 2 blocks over, would you recommend that we get around by rental car when we're in south side of Chicago?
I would say that's your best bet.
Okay. Because when we're in the loop, we're really going to be walking and taking public transportation. But you're saying once we head south, it might be handy to have a car.
Yeah, maybe jump in a zip car or something. I mean, there is public transportation, but not a lot of it goes through the parks, for one. And so those parks are huge. So if you really want a good long walk, you can do that. But I would say maybe you want to be driving. Plus, there's some sketchy neighborhoods on the south side.
Okay.
It's changed a lot over the years, but it still has its spots where maybe you don't want to be walking down the street.
Okay.
But the Hyde Park area, it's like this little oasis on the south side where there's a lot of tall buildings and there's a lot of restaurants and a lot of history. There used to be like a lot of jazz clubs and stuff over there, and those don't really exist, but there's still a lot of things going on because of the college. I mean, there's some beautiful buildings. There's a Rockefeller Chapel on the campus that's really worth looking at. It's beautiful. And they have a lot of chamber music and stuff. Orchestras play there. And so if you can get in there to see something like that, it's really worth it.
Excellent.
Let's see, as you go further south, the south side is huge. It's probably double the size of the north side. If you go south and a little bit to the west, you can go to the Beverly neighborhood, which is the original Beverly Hills, because back in the silent movie era, there was a lot of movie studios up on the north side off of Argyle. And a lot of the silent movie stars lived on the south side in this area that they called Beverly Hills. And as silent movies went away and people started going out to Hollywood, they basically renamed the Beverly Hills out there for this neighborhood in Chicago. So there's a lot of great old mansions there and stuff. And it's also where they do the South Side Irish Parade on St. Patrick's Day. Just driving around those windy hills, there's some really beautiful homes. The Walgreens mansion is there from Walgreen, a lot of silent movie stars. And then east of there is Pullman, which is where the Pullman train car company was. George Pullman built train cars, these luxury train cars. Right, and they were absolutely gorgeous. Well, he decided that he was going to build a whole factory town. So he bought this huge piece of land and he built his factory. And then he built all these homes, these row houses, and they're really iconic. They're red brick and they're all connected and they go around all these blocks. And he felt that if you worked for him, you lived in the town and you shopped at the store. And so it started out as a real good idea, but then he charged more for utilities than the utility company. You paid him for utilities, you paid him for groceries. And so eventually a lot of the people who worked there, instead of getting a paycheck, they were getting a bill. And it created this big unrest in Pullman. And so they finally did a strike. And of course, you go on strike. Well, you're living in his house, so you come home and all your belongings are on the street. So it created this event in Chicago that ended up creating a lot of social programs there, because all of a sudden there was 50,000 homeless people, all the people who had worked for him who went on strike. And so that was how Hull House was created, which still stands at the Circle campus on Halstead, just south of Roosevelt Road over there. It was like a social services organization created by Jane Addams to help house and feed all these people that were suddenly homeless. And a few years after the strike, George Pullman died, and his wife was so worried about his grave being vandalized that she had him buried under like 20 feet of concrete at Graceland Cemetery, which Graceland Cemetery is on the north side of Chicago at Clark and Montrose, but it's definitely worth checking out because it's a veritable who's who of Chicago, and the monuments there are absolutely incredible. There's all these beautiful statues. you could spend a couple hours in there. But Pullman is there, and he's buried under this giant concrete block. The row houses are still there, and they're really something to see, and they're based on the importance of the workers. So there's blocks where the houses are very tall, maybe 3 stories, and then there's blocks where the houses are just the regular workers, and they're much smaller. And there's a beautiful hotel there called the Florence Hotel, and they have a museum in there for Pullman. And they used to do brunches and stuff. I'm not sure if they still do, but you can rent it for weddings and events, and it's a beautiful piece of history. The architecture over there is really phenomenal. And then if you go further south, you come to the Illinois-Indiana border, which, I don't know, have you ever seen the movie A Christmas Story? You'll shoot your eye out, kid?
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I'm really more of a It's a Wonderful Life kind of guy. So,
well, that movie is based on Gene Shepard wrote it, and he lived in Hammond, Indiana, which is just over the Illinois-Indiana border. And it's all true stories from his childhood. And so Hammond, you can still go there. You can still see his childhood home and the school he went to. And today there's a Gene Shepard Community Center, and they have a permanent exhibit of artifacts related to Gene Shepard and his writings. In addition to A Christmas Story, he did 5 or 6 other movies that are really hard to find. You might find them on YouTube. And they all follow the life of Ralphie and Randy. And it's a great little slice of life of that area, that South Side.
Interesting. Well, we've made it to the border.
Yes.
And we need to start to wind us up. One thing you would like people to unlearn about the South Side of Chicago besides Chicago-style pizza?
People who come to Chicago are always afraid to explore the South Side of Chicago because they're told it's dangerous. And sure, there are parts that maybe you don't want to be walking through after dark, but there's so much rich history. It's really worth it to get off the beaten path and go check it out. I mean, there's just such great history in that part of the city and such great architecture and really great food. I mean, there's wonderful food.
One particular food that you just can't get in Oregon?
Well, it's got to be the Phil's Pizza.
Okay.
And maybe the bacon buns. I haven't found a bacon bun.
That sounds like a possibility there. We talked about a number of places to eat. Where would you stay to explore this region?
There's only one hotel I really can recommend in Chicago, and that's the Palmer House. And it's in the South Loop. It's on Monroe Street. And it was built by Potter Palmer in the turn of the last century, I guess, maybe the late 1890s. It actually burned in the Chicago fire 13 days after it opened, and he rebuilt it from the ashes. I mean, how devastating that must have been. But it is the most incredible hotel, and it's a very nice hotel, so it might deter people who are on a budget, but a lot of times they have really great specials and deals to stay there. I've even gotten rooms there off a Priceline when you name your price, that whole thing. Mm-hmm. So it's a great hotel, and the lobby is so incredible. You walk in, and the ceiling is all painted with these beautiful paintings, and it's just absolutely incredible. I cannot recommend it enough. Even if you don't stay at the Palmer House, go to the Palmer House and go walk in the lobby. You can sit there and have tea. They have high tea. They have restaurants in there, but that lobby is so amazing. It's just a beautiful old hotel, and it's full of history. Queen Elizabeth stayed there. I mean, it's just an incredible place.
Excellent. I'm assuming we mean Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes.
Okay. You're standing in the most beautiful spot in South Chicago. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
Oh, boy, there's so many places. Chicago's lucky in that they really focused on the beauty of the parks. And the parks there are just second to none. I mean, I've been all over America, and there is just no place like it with the parks that they have. I guess there's one place that's really amazing, and that's the Garfield Park Conservatory, which doesn't really fit into the whole South Side thing. It's on the west side, and it's definitely not in the best neighborhood. But it is so amazing. The architecture itself, it shouldn't be standing. There's no way it should logically be standing, but it is. And you can go there year round, though I don't recommend going there if it's very hot out because it's indoors. Mm-hmm. But it's a beautiful conservatory inventory of plants, and they've got all kinds of little ponds and things, and they've got cactuses and all kinds of tropical plants, and it's really amazing, and it's free to go to.
And you brought up weather and time of year. Obviously, cold in the winter, hot and humid in the summer. When would you recommend people go to the south side of Chicago?
The best weather in Chicago is in the fall. The spring can be iffy. It can rain. It can snow. Typically, September, October, those are really beautiful months in the city of Chicago. May is probably pretty nice. May and June, it's not too hot. But Chicago in the winter is very cold. And in the summer, the humidity paired with the heat can be really hard to deal with. I mean, it can be 95 degrees with 95% humidity, but it's not raining. So it can be pretty miserable as far as weather goes sometimes.
Okay. And everybody's heard that it's a windy city. The comment was actually originally made was a reference to the politics of the city being people full of hot air.
That's right.
But is it actually a windy city?
It is pretty windy. When you're downtown, though, you're not going to feel too much wind. The buildings are really, really tall in the downtown part of the city. And it's a pretty dense city. There's a lot of buildings. So the wind is pretty bad in the winter, but it's not windy like I'm on the Oregon coast, and the wind here is frightening sometimes. So it's nothing in comparison to that.
Excellent. So we've got two final questions. Before I get to them, one last thing you think people should know before they head to Chicago and start exploring the South Side?
I would do some research on the history of the city before you go, if you're going to go to Chicago, because there's so much rich history there. I mentioned Upton Sinclair and the Jungle, which is maybe not the best part of Chicago history, but Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, wrote it in Chicago, and he actually would sit in a park on the near north side and write. And that park, I think it's off of Armitage, has been transformed, and they have a statue of a Tin Man and the Wicked Witch of the West, and it's just this little square park. But there's a lot of great history there, and there's a anarchist history, there's a lot of immigrant history, where Chicago's a city of neighborhoods, or at least it used to be. And so it's amazing how the neighborhoods can change so quickly. You'll be in one neighborhood where almost everyone on the street is speaking Polish, and then you'll go a few blocks down and everyone's speaking Spanish. Go a few blocks from there, and it's a Somalian neighborhood, whatever. There's just all these wonderful, rich neighborhoods to explore. I mean, there's so much to see there.
Excellent. Last two questions, and you've listened to the show, so you know what's coming. You really know you're in the south side of Chicago when what?
There's a lot of interesting smells to the south side of Chicago that maybe aren't a lot of other places. You brought up the tanneries, so there's that. There's a lot of I remember living very close to a snack food manufacturer, so it smelled like pork rinds quite often. There's chemical companies down there. There's a lot of smells. And as you drive through the neighborhoods, even the restaurant smells will change depending on what kind of community it is. So I think the smells really dominate the South Side.
And if you had to summarize the South Side in 3 words, what 3 words would you use? Diverse, historic, and working class. Excellent. Our guest again has been Amy Bugbee. And Amy, we mentioned Suffering and Celebration of Life in America at the beginning of the show. What is that? It's a book that my husband and I wrote, and a movie. We spent a year traveling around America during the election year when Barack Obama was first elected president. When we started a year before the election, and we traveled until Election Day. And we interviewed people all across America from all walks of life. So during the year, we produced over 150 short 1 to 3 minute videos where we talked to various people. And we didn't ask about politics per se. We didn't ask about who are you going to vote for. We asked people if they vote and how they feel about America, the best and worst thing about America, and questions like that about free speech and things of that nature. So it was about politics without being about politicians. And so the book is The Suffering and Celebration of Life, and it's over 500 pages
of our story traveling across America and the interviews that we did with various people. And then the movie is all interviews with people that we met along the road talking about America and the things that are great about it and the things that need work and the future and art and all of the things that I guess make America what it is.
Excellent. And where can people read more about your writings and more about your movie project?
Well, the book and movie have their own website, which is usaodd.com. And I'm told I say that like a Chicagoan, so it's usaodd.com. And I guess probably from there you can find out more about my husband Shane and I and the other projects we've worked on.
Excellent. Well, Amy, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing with us your obvious love for the South Side of Chicago.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and talk about the South Side.
I heard this week from Mary, who said, I have thoroughly enjoyed your podcasts. I began listening to your podcasts as a panacea for my 3-hour round-trip commute. Ouch. I became hooked and found myself looking forward in my car for another experimental travel journey. However, I realized I wasn't receiving all the benefits because I wasn't able to enjoy the visual elements. Yes, I confess to looking down at the pictures on my iPod while stopped in traffic, but it just wasn't enough. So I now watch your podcasts while running on my treadmill, while once again turning an arduous experience into one I look forward to. I most recently went into the archives to listen to and watch episode 70 about bicycling through Tuscany. I was captivated by your guest as well as the alluring pictures and consider it one of my favorites. I'm a military spouse and I love to travel. We'll be leaving with our 2 children for Japan in June. I look forward not only to my own travels, but to the ones I hear on your show. It is truly the best travel podcast I have heard and seen. Thank you, Mary. And Mary, I'm glad you love the show. And as I wrote to Mary, please, all of you out there, do not look at the pictures of the Amateur Traveler, the iTunes enhanced version, while you are driving a car. I enjoy having you as listeners, and I would prefer you stay alive. I heard from Leonardo, hey, Chris, nice podcast show. I'd enjoy it even more if you could slow down the speech. You talk way too fast, man. Cheers. It's true, I do. I probably can't slow down. This was feedback I got after I did the show of my own journey to Japan, so there was more of me talking. I do talk fast. The problem is that as I listen to podcasts, I actually listen at double speed to every podcast I listen to, so I think I talk way too slow. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler because I've got to record the next one in 5 minutes. Don't forget Viatours, amateurtraveler.com/tours. If you have feedback, you can send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. Follow me on Twitter at Chris2X, or join the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler, where I think we're going to do a photo contest in April. And to get advertisers, I need your help by filling out a survey, amateurtraveler.com/survey. Remember that, amateurtraveler.com/survey. And as always, thanks so much for listening.